What's up, Packers fans? It's Aaron Nagler, along with my very special guest, the Don of the Pack a Day podcast himself. It's Andy Herman. Andy, how the hell are you, man?
It's draft week. We're what, 2 days away? We'll
2 days.
I know it seems crazy. I'm ready.
I'm so ready for this freaking draft to get here, to enjoy it, to kind of bask in the glow of said draft. I am most certainly ready for it. Hello to everybody in the comments. We'll get to your questions momentarily. Just gonna, kind of lay the groundwork, so to speak, with Andy here. And hello to everybody at YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. We're on Twitch tonight, so hello to the two people on Twitch going, oh, that's right, I forgot you have a Twitch channel. So Andy, looking at the draft, we've heard from Brian Gutekunst now. He said a whole lot of nothing about nothing other than Aaron Rodgers' contract and the cap crunch and all the stuff that came out of that. That has been beaten into the ground. It's been beaten to death. So I'm definitely not going to be talking about that tonight. But I did find it interesting how he talked about this draft class. At one point, he was asked about the deepest position, what he would think is the deepest position in this draft class. And, he name-checked offensive line and the secondary, et cetera. But I found it interesting hearing him say that there is no one position that he thinks is like exceptionally deep, especially comparative to past classes, because the lead up to you read all the draft stuff and everything we've heard about this draft class is deep at tackle, deep at corner, deep at wide receiver, and yet to hear a general manager say I didn't find a ton of depth at any one position, I thought that was pretty interesting.
I think there is a disconnect between what even those in draft media feel is deep and what NFL general managers view as deep. To me, like Brian Gutekunst is probably on like the 300th guy he would potentially sign to the practice squad, liking guys to show up there that would be potentially deep. But I do think just overall this draft class, because of the unique circumstances, guys opting out, more players being able to be carried over into next year's college football season, which will therefore make for a bigger draft class next season. I think everything's going to be a little bit delayed, and we're going to see a better draft class next year than this year. I really like the top of this class overall, but I do think as you start getting a little bit later in the draft, I think what you're going to end up seeing is guys that would normally be undrafted free agents start sneaking into that 6th, 7th round. And I think you're going to see GMs just take flyers on super high reward, don't even care if they pan out sort of players, just guys who have ridiculous measurables or did one thing amazing, and let's take a flyer and see if it sticks.
Yeah, and it was you talk about undrafted free agents. I thought it was the other kind of interesting note that I heard from Goody was the idea that it's going to be harder for undrafted free agents to make this team. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about there. Like, that it is a bit maybe not top heavy, but you got to think, especially for a team like the Packers that has been to back-to-back NFC Championship games. It is a very talented roster. They have 10 selections. I'll be surprised if they use them all. They have 10 draft selections. You have to think he's going to be maneuvering up and down the draft board. I think, this is probably going to be a year, even for a team like Green Bay, who has traditionally been very fertile ground. Agents traditionally really want to take the Packers calls at the end of the draft when they're starting the drum beat for undrafted free agents, because they know those guys are given real opportunities. This is a year where I think it's going to be tougher. And I think Goody is kind of saying this outright. It's going to be harder for undrafted guys to make this roster.
I really do too. And I think even going back to last season, we saw with the nuances. Now this year, they'll have the benefit of hopefully a rookie mini camp, OTAs, and those sort of things that'll help them out. But last year was the first time where you had the 53 roster cut down, and Green Bay didn't initially keep an undrafted free agent because for some reason they cut Chris Barnes and then
brought him back.
Right? Which is amazing. Just absolutely. I still want to know the exact thought process there of like, we just know nobody's going to claim him.
But you do, don't you? I mean,
I would think.
You got to think as a personnel person, you're sitting there going, there's not some dude with some binoculars at some closed family, or not, they didn't have family night last year, but some Lambeau Field practice, like from 60,000 foot view, like whatever, maybe somebody rented a blimp and spied Chris Barnes in practice. I think it was a pretty good bet that he wasn't going to get claimed.
I think so too, but yeah, it's still crazy they cut him and then start him week 1. But I mean, even going in again this season, I think it's going to be similar. Where I thought one of the interesting takeaways is he said they've got more players on their roster right now than normal because they don't anticipate signing as many undrafted free agents because
they're hovering around 70. He said, right?
Yeah. So, there's just not as many spots on that 90-man roster either for those guys. If they do take even 9, I think that only leaves about 10 undrafted free agents somewhere around there. Now, they could make some moves, but still, it's definitely less than normal.
No question about it. I want to say hi to everybody in the comments. Good to see everybody. Start us off with Steven Burgess. Thank you for the super chat, buddy. Your favorite wide receiver in the draft minus Chase. What do you think? What do you think, Herman?
I really like Elijah Moore, and I know that he, may be somebody that doesn't necessarily meet those usual thresholds for Green Bay. I see a Brandon Cook style wide receiver that can also do a lot of the gadget stuff. I think one of the things that he's very, very good at is continuing to run through the catch. Like, it's just very, very confident hands, which is something that I think a lot of Packer fans would appreciate from time to time. But, right. Just especially as those easy crossers that Matt LaFleur can just design like nobody's business. All of a sudden Elijah Moore is just kind of coming across the middle and picking those up. I just think that would be a very fun fit. I think he could be a potential punt returner. I think he could be a dynamic player that takes that Tyler Ervin role. I know it's not the traditional thing that they do. I will be sitting here shocked if they actually select him, maybe pleasantly shocked, but he is a very, very fun receiver.
Brandy, I love Brandy's comment. The wide receiver that is not on IR. Okay, that works. That works too. No doubt about it. Availability is your best ability. No question about it. Speaking of wide receivers, it's so fascinating to me that heading into last year's draft, there was so much talk about the Packers obviously were going to take a wide receiver. They were obviously going to draft one early and then famously didn't. Obviously went a very different way. But this year, it doesn't feel like there's this drumbeat or this foregone conclusion where I think this year it's much more likely that they are sitting there saying, well, we've got to draft at least one because of the fact that they have nobody under contract at that position next year.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And I totally agree. It's like the fan base has kind of finally realized, you know what, MVS and Alan Lazard, Devontae Adams, I think we're good with those. Bobby Tunyon at tight end. And so now, of course, is going to be the first round wide receiver. Like just as everyone is finally like, I can deal with this wide receiver core. But as you mentioned, this is a team that consistently looks a year ahead, if not more. And, looking at that wide receiver spot, yes, Devontae Adams probably back. Yes, Alan Lazard will be a restricted free agent, so likely back. But MVS unrestricted, EQ unrestricted, Devin Funchess, if he makes it through the entire offseason, everything unrestricted. So there's definitely spots, and you got to think that Green Bay wants to address that both short and long term.
Agree with that. Antoine, that's an interesting point. I like Antoine's comment here on YouTube. 2 positions essentially kept the Packers out of the Super Bowl, cornerback and offensive tackle, which is funny to me because I mean, obviously, right, because of David Bakhtiari's injury, the tackle aspect of it, I understand. Although I will say they're not playing in that NFC Championship game without Wagner and Turner, who played really damn well up until that final game. Clearly, they were overmatched in it, but I understand that thinking. And corner, I mean, there's no question about the secondary not coming to play in that particular game. The secondary had been playing better as the year went on. And certainly down the stretch, you really saw them kind of round into shape. But Chandon Sullivan getting picked on early, Kevin King's brain fart at the end of the first half, dropped interceptions, etc. But then you fast forward, and they did pick off Tom Brady 3 times. Now, one of those was a safety. Twice was obviously Jair. But I get that thinking, the idea that those positions came up short, so to speak. And it's no mystery that I think those are going to be 2 targeted positions in the draft this weekend, wouldn't you say?
I think the offensive line is one of the really interesting positions on this team because you take, the wide view of things, and for the next 2 seasons, you've pretty much, as soon as he gets healthy, you got David Bakhtiari at left tackle, Elton Jenkins somewhere, John Runyon Jr.
Anywhere you want.
Exactly. John Runyon Jr. probably somewhere, and Billy Turner is probably going to be a Packer this year and next year just based on how his contract is set up. So you've kind of got 4 of the spots solidified for 2 seasons at least. And then you still have Lucas Patrick, who's probably going to be a starter this year. So it's not like you need like this entirely brand new offensive line. Like a majority of the pieces are there. At the same token, you just lost Corey Linsley. You just lost Lane Taylor. You cut Rick Wagner. And one of the biggest pieces of this team a season ago was the depth and versatility among their offensive linemen. So exactly. I know they've got some interesting guys like a Simon Stepaniak, who we just don't know about, a Yash Nijman, who we just don't know about, some of those type of players. But you would think that this would be a position that Green Bay wants to continue to address, get more depth and talent and just competition for some of those guys like a Lucas Patrick, some of the top depth pieces, maybe even a John Runyon Jr. So I think it's a really intriguing position.
Totally agree there. I'm going to get to your super chats. Thanks so much. Keep them coming, everyone. Start off with PackFan39. Thanks for the support, buddy. Favorite offensive and defensive player that could be there at 29? Oh, boy, that's a wide open question. I'll throw it to you first so I have time to think. What do you think?
I was going to have you do the same. To me, there is a player that screams off the page of this entire draft. And I think we're all kind of expecting him to be gone. And this is not me reinventing the wheel. This is a name that jumped off everyone's page, and that's Greg Newsome. I've gone over this statistic on, I think, every show that I've done. So I apologize if you've heard it before. But the last 6 players that they've selected pick 33 or higher, going back to Kenny Clark, have been age 21 or under. 22 out of 25 of Goot's picks that we've known about so far from a measurable standpoint tested in the 80th percentile or higher at their given position, and everyone in the first 2 rounds. And then you look at what they've done since Ted Thompson came going into Brian Gutekunst. 13 of the 16 picks that they've taken with their first pick in the draft have been a premium position: quarterback, offensive tackle, corner, edge rusher, defensive lineman, outside corner, I should say, or defensive lineman. So you put all of those things together, and there's a handful of people that meet those requirements that are potentially there at pick 29 or at least thereabouts. And Greg Newsome is the one that, again, to me, screams off the page where can help now, can help into the future. We talked about wide receivers. Well, next year, Josh Jackson, free agent, Shannon Sullivan, free agent, Kevin King, free agent. It's Jair Alexander and a bunch of question marks at this point. I think he brings competition this season, both in the slot and on the outside. And then I think he's a long-term corner to pair with Jair Alexander. Probably need to move up to get him. We have no idea at this point. We're just projecting, but that's the player that screams off the page on defense. I'll let you go defense, and I'll come back to offense.
My defensive guy is Asante Samuel Jr., and I know he's short. I know he doesn't probably hit the threshold. Although you heard Gutekunst the other day say that Jair probably fell just below their Mendoza line, as he called it. But he was such a good player, they took him. And to me, that's what I see when I look at Asante Samuel Jr. And I think there's a very good possibility he's available at 29. He could go right before the Packers are on the clock. You look at the needs of the teams in front of them. I think that's a legit possibility. But if he's there, man, I'd love that pick. Pair him with Jair. And I know people are out there going, 2 short corners, etc. I don't give a shit, man. Both of those guys can ball. You put them, you mix them and match them. Maybe you kick them on the inside, make them utilize that star position sometimes. Mix and match. He is the ball skills, the physicality. Pick a trait. He's got it. Again, I understand the measurables aren't quite there. I don't care. And I know you don't want to keep picking exceptions, as the old famous Tom Landry quote. You keep making exceptions and you end up with a team full of them. And I understand that aspect of it. But I just think he is such a good freaking player. And there is so much potential there. I think you're turning what we were talking about before, a secondary that was really up and down, that did, like I said, round into shape. You're turning that into a real strength of your defense. I think he's that good a player. He could really solidify things on their back end.
And Shannon Sullivan's 5'11". You put Asante Samuel in for Shannon Sullivan. What, you lose an inch in height and you gain a ton of coverage skills.
And you gain a ton of ability. Yeah,
exactly. It's not like you're getting that much smaller. And yes, ideally, you probably don't want 2 5'10" guys, especially if they're both on the outside. But I would also really like 2 damn good cover guys. And that's what, to me, both Asante Samuel and Jair Alexander would bring. Going offense, I already went Elijah Moore earlier. So I'm just because I do think Rashad Bateman is another really interesting player, kind of in the vein of Jordan Love, where his previous season was much better than his past season. But I do think that he runs full speed at corners, attacks them, attacks their weaknesses, attacks space. He has strong hands. He will have a concentration drop here or there, which will make some Packer fans shudder. But I just think he brings a ton of ability to the table. And you pair him with a Devontae Adams. And more, what I mean here is the ability to learn from Devontae Adams and his insane release game. I think the sky's the limit for Rashad Bateman. He doesn't come into a situation where, how many times have we heard this before, that he has to come in and play right away. You give him a year to develop, and I think by next year when Green Bay potentially needs him, he could be gangbusters by that time.
See, you're just giving the people what they want. I understand. We all want new toys, and it'll be really exciting.
Samuel.
I get it. Well, no, but that's at least, some of the, like you were just talking about, premium positions, corners. When was the last time they took a wide receiver in the first round? Well,
True.
I mean, it's just not, I just can't see it. And as much as I would love to say, yes, absolutely, wide receiver. I mean, give me the best offensive tackle remaining on the board. That's literally, and I don't know who that would be. I got to think, obviously the Packers will have their very differing views, probably differing than most of the consensus around the league and or the media. So I'm not going to even presume to, even start to pretend, but I know they've done a really good job later in the draft finding offensive linemen. Traditionally, they've found, college tackles that project to guard or the interior in general. Yes, they hit it out of the park with David Bakhtiari, but more often than not, this has been a personnel group that, if you're sitting there in the late first round and there's a tackle that you think you can plug in and play for 10 years, the Packers are going to try to do that. Now, they haven't hit on every single one of them, but more often not, that they get those guys with premier traits, what have you, at the tackle position. I think that's, you got to build those lines up. You got to, the game is won in the trenches. And I think I'll be surprised if we get, if the defensive talent isn't there. If they do go offense, I think offensive tackle it just makes way too much sense for them to pass on.
And Sam Cosmi is a really interesting player that hits all their athletic thresholds. And I know he needs some work. There is no coach on this entire staff that I trust more to get out of a ball of clay than the offensive line coaches. And I think they will turn him into an absolute machine. Again, maybe not overnight. It may take some time, but I've been so incredibly impressed with what those guys have done across the offensive line. If you get a player like that, I think the sky would be potentially the limit.
Do you think the Whitewater kid's not supposed to go in the first round, right?
No, Miners, no. He's supposed to likely go round 2. It's a possibility he could be there and around 2, or maybe somebody Green Bay.
That's why. Hey, I would love. That's a story I'd love. Come on, now how much fun would that be? I'm all in. If they don't go tackle early, maybe they do that in the second. Andrew, thank you for the super chat. Hello from the UK, still up at almost 3 a.m. It's funny because we wanted to do this because so many people on the West Coast are like, we want more late live content, and here's Andrew over in the UK staying up till 3 a.m. Finally caught a live stream. Who are you guys, quote, must draft if he's there at 29 player this year? Ooh, I always love this. Who are you pounding the table for, Andrew?
Again, I'm going to say Greg Newsome, but since we just talked about him, I won't talk about him. But Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is totally like my guy in this draft. And listen, I have been burned so many times by off-ball linebackers who look awesome in the slot in college, and then they don't have to go against guards. And Miles Jack started that way out of UCLA, and then he's progressed over the last couple of years into a nice player, but had some struggles his first couple of years adapting. Stephon Anthony, another one at the University of Clemson, who came in, didn't have to play a ton against a lot of those guards, had a ton of protection up front, and then came to the NFL and couldn't hang. So I've been burned by this type of player. Isaiah Simmons, we saw, had a tough time transitioning. The guy who was a no doubt, top 10 pick.
Exactly. The way they talked about it, yes, 1,000%.
No doubt, right?
Yep.
Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is now in that same position. I am ready to be hurt again. I love how he plays football. He is so physical. He has got great instincts. He's phenomenal in coverage. I love watching him play. I don't think Green Bay would go in that direction, so I'm wasting my breath here, but he is a Andy Herman pound the table guy.
You know me, Andy. I don't have Andrew. I'm sorry. I'm going to punt on this because I don't have any must drafts. You know me. Like this is. I have implicit trust in Brian Gutekunst, and let me tell you, this has been a journey to arrive at this point. I used to, pound the table for guys. I used to get all upset. The last year, actually, it's funny you say Miles Jack because that was the year where they were literally about to hand the card in, and then at the last minute decided to take Kenny Clark instead. And that turned out okay. But I was so upset. I was so mad. And I'll never forget. I tweeted the tweet I sent out that night was something about Ted Thompson always gonna come up short because he's always worried about the future and not helping the present. Blah, 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 blah. Nagler's just being an idiot. Kenny Clark, awesome player. So that, like I said, and there's a long history leading up to this. So whoever they take, I'm going to get on board with. There's no one there. I mean, if Barmore falls, I might start getting excited. I would love that. Get Kenny Clark some help, but I don't think he's going to be there at 29. I mean, maybe, but I doubt it. But we'll see. We'll see. You never say never. Kyle, thank you for the super chat. Thoughts on Vera Tucker, St. Brown, and Hunfunga? I can't even pronounce.
I'm gonna go AVT because I've studied him more. I've studied a little bit of St. Brown. I'll be totally transparent. I have not got to Hunfunga quite yet, but he is on my list before this draft. Because I'm the nerd that I am.
Hunfunga, that's a real name. This is not like a Star Wars thing, like a joke. Like that's a real dude.
We're not trolling you yet, Aaron. We'll get there. No, I'm just kidding. But the nerd I am, I have off the next few days just to kind of, why not? Why the hell not?
Yes, you do.
Anyway, Elijah Vera Tucker, I love. I think he's the top interior offensive lineman in this draft for a reason. I think you want to talk about being able to bring in. I know he's not going to replace Corey Linsley, but being able to move Elton Jenkins potentially inside to center, I think you're actually replacing Elton Jenkins with somebody who has tremendous versatility, can play outside, can play inside. Not sure he could play center like Elton, but probably the 4 other positions he can hang at any given time. So I think you'd bring in somebody that has that same type of ability. It would be a ton of fun. Again, we're talking about a player that's probably not going to be there. St. Brown, obviously EQ's brother. I think he has a bigger upside than what EQ. Actually, I don't know that that's true. I think EQ had the better upside. I think this St. Brown, I'm always going to pronounce the name wrong. Amon-Ra St. Brown is
You're a braver man than I am. Well
has a higher floor, and I think he's very, very consistent. Definitely usually fits what Green Bay kind of looks for. They took one St. Brown already. What's not to take another one? So definitely within the realm of possibility, but both would be fun players on this roster.
They like those bigger wide receivers. There's no doubt about it. You heard
and wide receivers with long names.
Yeah, exactly. You heard Goody joke about the fact that Ron and Ted had banged it into their heads that they weren't allowed to take shorter guys. And he jokes, but he's telling a bit of truth there. I mean, sure. Ron, going back to Ron, they have been steadfast about not getting smaller guys, which, I know some people kind of get upset about that, but hey, that's their system. And they've done a pretty damn good job of drafting wide receivers. So who am I to, quibble with it?
And Cyril complain sometimes too when the Packers don't play to their strengths in the weather and things like that. Well, if you want a physical team that's going to play well in the weather, draft big physical players. Like you can't have it both ways.
Especially when you're talking about the running game and trying to get things going, and you're not busting out big runs without wide receivers who know how to be physical in the run game.
To be fair, you have to use that 250-pound back in short yard situations, though, if you want to see that.
Sir, I can show you videotape of one A.J. Dillon absolutely decapitating a Rams defensive tackle crossing the goal line in the playoffs. So
true story.
It's coming. It's coming. Cyril, thanks for the super chat. Justin Harrell or Dayton Jones, which was the bigger surprise? The surprise being like how their careers went, or when they were drafted. I'm assuming when they were drafted, which was the. I think so surprise. Too. I guess Justin Harrell for me. I remember. I mean, we all remember the classic video of the 3 gentlemen in their basement absolutely freaking out about that pick. That is one of the all-time great internet videos. Dayton, that made sense, I thought, at the time. And I know he never really lived up to that billing, although even when he left the Packers, his final year in Green Bay, he had more quarterback pressures than anyone else on the team, hit the quarterback more than anybody else on the team. So, I understand he was never like a superstar, but Dayton at least had a career. And when he was drafted, I wasn't shocked, but Justin Harrell, that was a surprise.
Yeah, Harrell shocked me. Dayton, I think I've gotten 3 first-round picks correct ever in my entire time watching the Packers, and Dayton was one of them. So I was maybe that was the only surprising thing, is that they actually went with the player that I thought they might take. I didn't want them to take him, but I thought they would take him.
If I remember right, I think the only one I've ever gotten called before the draft was when they drafted HaHa Clinton Dix, and that's because everybody and their grandmother knew they needed safety help, and he was definitely going to be available, and you knew Rex Ryan was probably going to take the more physical guy in Adams earlier. So that was like the only time it was so obvious who was the
last. When was the last time the Packers took somebody that you wanted them to take? Mine was all the same. Mine was Bonnie Holiday. That was the last time the Packers took somebody that I wanted, that I was like really hoping. I really like Jair.
Jonesing for them. Yeah. I was excited about Jair. But I remember that was the what's the kid's name who's out
in James?
That was who I remember. I in the Green Bay Press Gazette's mock, that's who I had the Packers taking, and I was really excited about him. And then of course they traded away, blah blah blah. But yeah, I can't remember the last time.
I know it doesn't happen very often. They go in their own direction. Again, it's worked out more often than not.
I mean, yeah, they seem to know what they're doing.
My
Thoughts
biggest
on
pissed off was Boss Bailey, by the way, over Nick Barnett. That was the most pissed off. I wanted Boss Bailey so bad. They picked Nick Barnett at the same position.
Bailey,
I was so mad. It turned out okay.
That's a throwback, man. That's almost as good as Bao Ju. I like that.
That's a great one too.
First round pick, Attorney Cooper. Let me throw this to you, Andy, because I rail about this all the time. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. First round pick needs to contribute next season while also developing, multitask. What do you think about that statement there, Andy Herman?
Needs to. It would be nice if you got both. I mean, that's definitely the goal. I think the best thing that you can do is view the draft as an investment, as Brian Gutekunst so eloquently stated the other day. I think you look at it as the best possible long-term investment for the Green Bay Packers. And if you can get them in and coach them up and get ready to play day one, similar to a Jair Alexander, was he perfect year one? No. Was he good and capable of playing year one? He was. I think if you can hit on something like that, fantastic. But I don't think my favorite is need is a terrible evaluator of talent. And the moment that you start looking at needs and trying to figure out which ones are going to be the best that can play right now, you're potentially missing out on guys that could help you the most tomorrow, because somebody gets hurt now and everything changes a minute from now. Hell, the freaking Brewers were bashed because they had too many outfielders all offseason. Why are they signing Jackie Bradley Jr.? Because you can only play so many outfielders. And now Yelich and Kane have been out for the first month of the season, and now they don't have enough outfielders. So like these things happen immediately. And the moment that you start letting yourself be so consumed with like this one hole here on the roster, or they need to play right now, you lose sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is always the best way to go.
Absolutely. And I think that's how reaches happen. That's how we got to get a guy, we got to plug him in. Well, then okay, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily taking the best football player. And I think the more talent you collect, the better football team you're going to have. And that's not to say, Wildy brought this up in Gutekunst's chat the other day. Sometimes if the guys are evenly rated, need can be a tiebreaker. I'm down with that. And especially if it's a guy who can step on the football field and contribute right away, no question about it. But man, you start trying to plug holes via the first round of the draft, you can get in trouble real quick. And that's not to say the guy can't. Not to say that, whoever they pick at 29 can't come in and contribute right away. I hope he does. That'd be great. But I don't think that should be your driving force.
It's foolhardy to think like the GMs have like the cheat sheet that says this guy's going to be able to play right away.
Right,
like how many times have we seen the player that's most NFL ready be out of the league in 3 years? Like there's nothing to say that just because if they would have went with a different player at a different position, that's an area of need, that he gets on the field and is good right away. He could need 2 years to develop too. You just don't know.
Preston Mayer, thanks for your super chat. Needlessly throwing your money away to support Cheesehead TV. I thank you very much. Nagler should enter the draft, and Green Bay will trade up to number 1 to select him as the future at quarterback. Preston, let me tell you something. Anybody who's seen tape, and I pray to God it's all been destroyed, of my brief career at quarterback, both in Pop Warner, junior high, and high school, will tell you that would be a monster mistake, a massive mistake. So I thank you for the support, but God help us, Jesus, no. Thoughts on Jacob Harris as a mid-round wide receiver pick? I have no idea who that is. John.
Same. I haven't watched him yet.
So sorry. We ain't got no deep third-round knowledge of wide receivers. That would just be me. But I mean, I can tell you what though, I'll be absolutely shocked if we don't come out of this draft with at least 1, if not 2 wide receivers.
Agreed.
And I know I keep saying like I don't think they're going to make 10 selections, but I do think wide receiver is going to be a really interesting group coming into training camp, not just out of the draft, but just everybody they're bringing back. You're talking about St. Brown heading into the last year of his deal. You throw Funchess in the mix. It's going to be a really intriguing group.
Totally agree.
No doubt about that. We got time for 1 or 2 more. Let's see. Nagler, can you throw a 3-yard out? 3-yard out, I got it, Matt. But anything longer than that, I got a problem. Can Zaven Collins fall to 29? Lewis, anything is possible. What do you think, Andrew? Can Zaven Collins fall to 29?
I think he could. He definitely. The Packers generally like the linebacker that can take on a guard at the point of attack and be a little bit more physical. and not, they're not always looking for the smallish guy, which is why I said earlier, JOK may not be in their plans. Jamin Davis is somebody I really like, but I'm not sure he's going to be in their plans. But if you told me they went linebacker round 1, Zaven Collins is a really interesting player, but to me, that would be the type of guy that they would target, even though they haven't exactly been gangbusters on linebackers early in drafts lately.
J-Rock asks, will Joe Barry have any input on player selection, which is interesting because Gutekunst was actually asked that question. And to me, the response was like really telling because he said, there's always communication, and especially between me and Matt. It's like Brian's talking to Matt, and I'm sure Matt is hearing from Barry about the scheme and what they want. They're in concert together. But man, it is Matt's ship, and he is definitely the captain. And Brian and Matt are certainly speaking and exchanging, ideas and what they want roster wise. I don't think Barry is such an interesting hire in that regard because I do think, obviously it's Matt's guy. There's no question about that. But this is Matt's imprint on the defense, and Gutekunst saying that specifically, I thought was pretty telling.
Yeah, I agree. And this is definitely Matt's team through and through, just the type of, like, when you start seeing Josiah DeGuara in the 3rd round, and when you start seeing like Brian Gutekunst saying, I'm talking to Matt, like this is, and what it should be, right? If you're going to bring in a new head coach, let him build his program the way that he wants to build it. We are seeing it. We saw the results last year, and by all means, continue to do it.
I couldn't agree more. Sean, thanks for the super chat. Goody sounded in shock about getting a sufficient big board together. Thoughts on getting big boys for the D-line rotation, i.e. Tyler Shelvin? I mean, you guys have been hearing me all freaking offseason. Get Kenny Clark some help. I hear you about the sufficient big board. It's funny that has been kind of bandied about, so to speak, the last kind of week and a half in draft Twitter, as far as we hear from more and more personnel people, decision makers talking about the class itself, the herky-jerky nature of the offseason and the college football season. I suspect it's not that different. I do know that, no question, because of the holes in evaluation that would normally be there that are kind of sitting there and their question marks, etc. They probably do have a number of guys off the board or have question marks about guys where they normally wouldn't. But, most teams, most years don't have nearly the number of guys on their boards that, media mock drafts and media lists have. Like we talk about in the media, I see people talking like 300, 500 players, blah, blah, blah. Like some teams have like 126 dudes, and like if they get out of the top 50, then they start going down the list. But yeah, this idea that they're cobbling together a big board, I think that's a little much.
I agree. It's always where I struggle too. Like, I don't think I've ever put together like a top 100 or 300 big board, because what ultimately happens is I get to a player and I just don't like him. And I'm like, why am I gonna, if all of a sudden there's like a guy in the first round.
Teams do the exact same thing.
Exactly. Right?
100%.
That's like, probably going to be selected in the first round. And I have him at like pick 241 just because, like, where am I going to put it? If I don't like him, I don't like him. Like,
I'm so glad you said that, because I wish more fans understood that the really subjective nature of it. I mean, there are a handful of guys who are blue chip players that probably everybody agrees, okay, that's a guy, that's a player, that's a guy who's going to have an excellent career regardless of situation, right? And then you get past the first, 15, 20 dudes, it's all so subjective. And it's all like you're saying, like you're going to watch a player and be like, oh man, I just see nothing there. And you talk to somebody else and he's like, oh yeah, I have a 2nd round grade on him. Like that's why every year, and especially this year, it makes sense to drop down, accumulate more mid-round picks, take more kind of swings at the plate, so to speak, because it's such a razor kind of sharp difference. Dustin, thanks for the super chat. Who is this year's Eddie Lacy, aka guy projected in the 1st round who could fall to the late 2nd? That's a good question. I mean, I have no idea, but I'll go with I had somebody in mind the other day too. The kid. Oh, Andy, I'm going to have to punt to you because I had this conversation with somebody the other day and I can't remember his name now.
I think like the centers are really interesting, like the Creed Humphreys and the Landon Dickersons. Landon Dickerson's just had an injury list, the lengths of which you really like. You start spending the 1st or 2nd round pick on that sort of injury list, and you can get yourself in trouble really quick quick. I think somebody's going to take him in the second, but could definitely see him slide. I know I've seen teams, mock drafts or whatever, you have him in the first round just based on his injury history. That's somebody. And then Creed Humphrey, who I think is really good. But again, you start talking about centers, it's not always the most valued position. Like those are things that I could potentially see falling down a little bit. Again, you just never know how these things are going to go, but you can bet that there's going to be somebody that was projected, mid-late first round. That's all of a sudden, mid-late second round.
I think too, it's funny because I think positionally, right? I think there are plenty of players that are talented. It's like offensive tackle is a perfect example where we've heard a lot about how deep the class is and how talented it is. To me, and I do think a bunch will go in the first round. There's no doubt about it. But I'll bet there's a good chance that some of the names that have bandied about as, surefire first rounders, teams know it's a deep class. So, let's get a different position in our wheelhouse as far as like some other need on our board, because we know there are going to be talented guys there day 2, even into day 3. Whereas, that first round guy maybe falls to the top of the second or third. So, it's hard to pinpoint, obviously, but I think positionally, the positions that are dubbed, these are so deep. Well, that means there's a good chance that teams are going to wait, intermittently.
And you mentioned the offensive tackle. Like to me, the difference between like the fifth offensive tackle, fifth, sixth offensive tackle, and like the 9th or 10th offensive tackle isn't that different.
Great.
So,
exactly.
You might see like a Liam Eichenberg or a Sam Cosmi or a Dylan Redunz or like one of those type of guys listed in the back end of mock drafts. Well, because they're so closely related, if one of those goes from like 6 to 10, like all of a sudden they're going from late first to late second. So it's those things that can happen when guys are so closely related. And I think that offensive tackle one, as you brought up, is a really great example of that.
Overshadow Sean, thanks for the super chat. I want all big uglies, O-line and D-line, all 10 picks. Overshadow, you got my vote, buddy.
Yeah.
I am all in on that. Own it up front. That is how you win. Aaron Gonzalez, thank you for the super chat. Thought Goody handled the "is Rodgers unhappy" questions well. Will this be our "they need wide receiver" narrative that follows us week to week? Christ, I hope not. I really hope not.
But
Andy, do you have anything to say about Aaron Rodgers' contract? Anything you want to put out there?
But I think this is, you mentioned, Goody is, handled the questions well. When you draft Jordan Love and you have Aaron Rodgers on the roster, you're not like, the pick is one thing, the player is one thing. I wholeheartedly agree in the quarterback being the most important position in all of sports, and having 2 of them is better than one. But the Pandora's box that you open with both the fans and the media is this, and that every press conference that you have and that every article that's written about your team, unless you have like a guaranteed amount of money in Aaron Rodgers where he's going to be here, the question is going to remain, will Aaron Rodgers be a Packer, or how is this ultimately going to end up with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love? Because again, you can't have both on the field at the same time. And that's just the easy narrative to talk about and write about and everything like that. So it's just, that's the Pandora's box that opens. And we, as Packer fans, we should all know that this can go very, very well, and that you could end up with another decade plus long franchise quarterback. But as Packer fans, we also understand the pain that happened during that time when Brett Favre was on his way out of town and in a Minnesota Vikings jersey. And that stuff sucks too. So that's just the thing that opens up. And that's why this stuff will continue to be bantered about, because it is what it is. And Brian Gutekunst knew that with the selection. It makes me feel stronger about it because he knew that going in. He knew that going in, that this was going to be the discussion, what would happen. And he felt so strongly about that player. The same thing that Ted Thompson felt about Aaron Rodgers. He felt so strongly about it. He said, I know people are going to hate me for this. I know that this is going to be a constant conversation, but I like this player so damn much that I'm going to trade up to get him anyway, and damn everything else.
You know what Ted and Brian both did that was so smart? So smart, smarter than I could have ever been. You know what they did when they made those picks? They didn't have a Twitter account. That was really the smartest thing they ever did. No doubt about it. Big Cheese, thanks for the super chat. You think if Farley falls due to his injury concerns, the Packers take him, or are the injury concerns too much? I was asked this earlier. I'd be absolutely shocked if the Green Bay Packers medical staff signed off on that. And that's not to say that it could never happen. Maybe it does. Maybe they medical comes back great. I'll be absolutely shocked. What do you think, Andy?
Here's the thing that I will always say about Green Bay. If there is a top 15 talent that falls to the Green Bay Packers at the end of the draft, they will not be the one to stop the slide, because unless it's like a quarterback where something crazy happens, but if it's due to injury or due to character concerns, one of those two things, they will not be the guy that stops the slide, because they are usually generally very conservative when it comes to injuries and stuff like that.
Case in point, what I was talking about before, the Miles Jack pick. I mean, literally the reason was because of the knee. They loved the player. They wanted to take him. Medical at the end overrode everything. And so I'm with you. I don't think they would be the ones to make that pick. And that's, I think he's going to be a really good player. And I really hope, obviously, that he does get drafted and he goes on to play really well in the NFL and has a great career. He's got all the talent in the world. I'm with you. I'd just be very surprised if the Packers were the one to make that pick. All right. We're going to get going. Andy, I cannot thank you enough for hanging out and talking Packers draft with me here on Cheesehead TV.
Thank you.
We're so close. We're so close. Hopefully you can stop by the Cheesehead TV live stream at some point.
I'm going to, for sure.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Please, especially on Saturday, man. I'm going to need some company because God knows Banky ain't hanging around for rounds 4 through 5. Thanks to everybody in the comments. Thanks for Andy for hanging out. We'll talk to you guys soon. Please do me a monster favor. Hit like on this video and then tell your friends and tell your family. Cheesehead TV. We're devoted to Green Bay Packers fans worldwide. Thanks a lot, Andy. Have a great night.
Yep.